Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the course Communication Theories 2. Today I will discuss with you a topic, designing a research proposal. Whenever you design a research proposal, you will start it from an introduction. It would be recalled that most research projects fall into a definite pattern or design. In other words, a distant way of thinking characterized every research. In conceiving a research proposal, the researcher passes through the different stages. The researcher forms a clear cut notion of the problem he wishes to investigate, writing out the problem statement which helps to clarify it. The researcher then starts to collect all relevant available information that he possibly can. He must familiarize himself with all that is already known about the problem, both facts and the theoretical framework being used to interrupt the facts. Knowing that what is already known helps to find out a problem in the mind of the researcher and formulate the hypothesis to be verified. The scholar then formulates a theory or hypothesis to explain the phenomena under investigation. He presupposes the probable solution and what might both sometimes several solutions may appear possible, and he may decide to design a study to test which of these is true. The researcher then proceeds to test the hypothesis. The testing of hypothesis is the distinctive characteristic of all research. The research design is specifically chosen to test the hypothesis. If the evidence or the collected data supports the hypothesis, it may be accepted. Uh, on the other hand, the data fail to explain all evidence in a completely logical fashion, it should be rejected. Though there is some variation in the format prescribed by different universities, the following information is most often required about the research proposal, like the statement of the problem. What's the purpose, objective, and the significance of your study? The definitions, assumptions, and limitations of your study. Then you will review the related literature. The third chapter is theoretical framework. Next, you must have some hypotheses and questions to measure, and then proposed research procedures, and also at the end there will be a time schedule. Uh, in the above sections, each of the would be discussed so that you may feel confidence about developing the proposal for your research in your final semester. A statement of the problem. One of the unholy joys one feels as Pakistani researcher is the realization that what fertile land Pakistan is for research. There are unlimited number of problems waiting at every step for the researchers to carry out the study. When one talks to graduate students, they seems to be at a loss as to what should be the topic of their research. The reason perhaps is lack of insight in the research process itself. There are many misunderstandings about the research activity itself which confuse the researcher, like research is nothing more than gathering the facts already known. Research can be done on anything and everything. Research should be undertaken on entirely new areas or ideas about which no one knows anything till you are doing it. These are all misleading statements and show lack of insight into scientific inquiry. This is one of the reasons that many of the social sciences haven't carried out scientific research and many of its important problem areas due to the complexity and non-measurability of the problem situation. A research proposal, whether designed for dissertation purposes, for a degree requirement, or for an external funding agency, may be considered as a response to a problem, because that is what research really is. Despite this obvious and integral link between the statement of the problem and the reasons put forward for carrying it out, it is not easy to conceive the problem clearly and scientifically. There is a strong feeling amongst the professors who evaluate a research proposal about the most frequent deficiency noted by them is the lack of a clear problem statement to define and guide the inquiry, and the most frequent complaint of the graduate students and their seemingly never ending search for a problem significant enough to pursue and discrete enough to handle. The effects of the writer is to demystify the process of generating problem statements, which will be adequate to define, guide, and conduct systematic inquiry. Next is the purpose of the study. When the problem area has been selected and its theoretical framework determined, the third step is to state the purpose, objective, and significance of the study. As I stated earlier, that research is always undertaken in response to a problem. Accordingly, the purpose of the study is always to understand better the factors which affecting the problem and to test one or more possible solutions of the problem. It may be emphasized here that the purpose of the study and the objectives of the study are not necessarily the same. You may recall, I will give you an example that what is the effect of the use of primary teaching kit on the cognitive development of a primary school children. The purpose of the study is to determine whether the use of the primary teaching kit helps in fostering the objective of the study of primary school children. However, the objective of the study is to determine whether or not to continue the use of the primary teaching kit or whether any changes need to be made in its components. The functions of the objective section of a research proposal is proposing. It means to propose the goals or aims which the researcher intends to achieve as a result of the proposed inquiry. Next one is justifying, to justify the selection of the objectives which are chosen by explicating the criteria implied in making the choice and by showing how the objectives meet the criteria. Next is the letting a reader lay down objectives. These are the objectives which add no new knowledge to the one already known. The free floating objectives, this is very common case in the studies which are not carefully thought out. It means the objectives which have no relationship with the study in hand. A common example is when a neophyte researcher, while planning a survey of a small village, writes and has objectives that it will be helpful in planning the national policies, etc. Objectives without criteria, unless the objectives are evolved from the theoretical framework and conform to the criteria laid down for the relationship to be established amongst a set of variables, they cannot be accepted as legitimate objectives of the study. Next is the definitions, assumptions, and the limitations of your study. In this chapter, you should be provide a definition of all such terms being used in the statement of the problem, or is ambiguous and likely to be misinterprets. The definition of these terms helps sharpen the frame of a reference with which the researcher approaches the problem. Let us take an example like involvement of the students of classes 9th and 10th class in the extra curricular activities adversely affects their academic performance in the board's examination. The researcher must explain what he means by the term involvement. Is watching a hockey match played between his school and an out of town school is part of the district hockey championship term is an involvement? He must clearly lay down uh, uh, mm, the criterion for classifying students into the group involved in extracurricular activities and the group not involved in such activities. Apart from laying a cutoff point, namely hours per week spent in extracurricular activities, the researcher should also define the term extracurricular activities. What would be taken is a measure of academic performance shall have to be defined. Would it be the total marks, percentage of marks, division obtained, or only pass and fail? It would be clear that definition of these terms would determine what data are to be collected or organized. Next is the review of the related literature. In this chapter or in this section, the researcher should give a summary of previous research carried out in this field and should also state that what recognized experts have written on the subject. This indicates that the researcher is familiar with what is known and hence has the necessary conceptual background to take up research in this area. It is obvious that further knowledge must be built on the edifice of sound previous knowledge. A review of related literature also helps the researcher in developing the theoretical framework within which the researcher is to be undertaken and also helps him in formulating useful hypotheses. He should review the findings of researchers undertaken in the problem area and such other closely related problems as may have some bearing on this subject. The researcher should describe the research designs of the studies reviewed, procedures employed, and data gathering instruments used. The population study and previous researchers should also be clearly described. Finally, the researcher should state recommendations for further research made by the authors. When a number of related studies are reviewed, the researcher may notice areas of agreements and disagreements between these. A critical analysis of these and the reasons for the conflicting findings should be stated. A thorough and critical review of related literature would provide an invaluable source material for future researchers, besides being of immense help to the researcher and focusing his attention on the problem area. Next is the theoretical framework. Neither can problems be formulated nor can adequate research designs be developed except within a specified theoretical framework. What is meant by framework is a conceptual or theoretical frame which every researcher has to adopt to view a problem and find a solution. Implicitly or explicitly, every inquirer adopts his own pairs of glasses through which he views the problem and within the perspective identifies and orders the variables on which he will concentrate his attention. Let us go back to some of the research problems given in the previous sections and try to identify the theoretical framework, like temper tantrums among 6-year-old breastfed and bottle fed children of middle class educated urban mothers. It is obvious that the researcher thinks that the child rearing practice relating to feeding is mainly responsible for the temper tantrums displayed by the children. Restricting the study to 6-year-old children of middle class educated urban mothers, which will help in identifying and restricting the population from which the sample is to be obtained. However, even the selection of middle class educated urban mothers for study may be indicative of the researcher's theoretical framework. Let's come to the hypotheses and questions. The statement of hypotheses are questions to be pursued in the investigation completes the 4 steps that collectively might be described as the inquirer's procedure guide. Number 1 is the problem statement identified the interacting factors which gave rise to the anomaly, contradictory facts, exceptions in knowledge which is being investigated, and signal the strategy for attacking the problem to be employed by you. Next one is the conceptual framework, sharpen the focus of the study for reviewing the phenomena under investigation. It's the process, of course, screening out other views. The objectives narrowed the investigation further by selecting the ultimate aims or purpose of the research and the development activity, and concurrently screened out other subjectives or objectives which might have been chosen. The statement of hypotheses and questions is actually a 2-step process. Now, number 1 is the selecting the key questions to be pursued for among several questions appropriate to the objectives. The second one is operationalizing the definition that will be employed for the major variables in the study. Next is the proposed research procedures. In this section of the research proposal, an outline of the research plan should be given. The research plan deals with the variables to be measured, the population to be sampled, the measuring devices to be used, and the procedures to be used in analyzing the data. The validity and reliability of data gathering devices should be critically evaluated, and the limitations, if you have any, should be pointed out. At the end, there is the time schedule, and then I will conclude it. In this section, the researcher should present a time schedule for carrying out the various steps in his research plan. This would help the researcher budget his time and energy and complete his research within a reasonable time. Some of the phases of the work would overlap, while others would be initiated after some phase has been completed. Data gathering shall follow designing of data gathering device. However, review of related literature can be carried out while waiting for the data to be gathered. The ultimate objective of this lecture was to keep you step by step towards the formulation of your research outline or proposal. It may be recalled that the steps that need a special care and attention were preparing a statement of problem, conceptualizing the theoretical framework within which the problem is to be solved, formulating hypotheses, and designing appropriate research procedures. Even though each of the steps in the preparation of a research outline has been uh, profusely illustrated, and opportunities have been provided to youth practice the required skills. A complete research outline has been appended to this lecture to present an end product of the entire process. I think that's enough for today. Thank you so much for watching my video lecture.